Back to school and work after the holidays means back to school and work, packed lunches. If you're like me and you find the whole idea of packing lunches to be so frustrating at times, especially when you're living with special dietary needs, I've got the perfect thing for you. Some delicious, crispy chicken tenders that are gluten-free, egg-free, corn-free, and even a dairy-free option. And both are equally as delicious. So let's go ahead and make some. Mise en place is just a French culinary term that just means having everything in place and order, your ingredients ready, so that cooking is a breeze. Another part of your mise en place is understanding your recipe. So for me, it means understanding my recipe of my chicken scratch, which I've written in my little handy dandy book. But for you, it might mean having this YouTube video open if you're following along with this, or having my website open with the recipe and the details, whatever works for you. And then you can gather all your ingredients. I have all of my ingredients, everything that I need to go. I'm going to prep my ingredients, which is part of my mise en place. So first thing I'm going to do is get my garlic ready to go. Now, this is just my preferred way of doing it. You could do it however you like. I like to just cut off the top and the bottom, and I use my microplane. Just cut off the tops and the bottoms, and it just peels right off. And then I place my garlic in here. So this is the same microplane, and it comes with these little tops and bottom. And this microplane, you can actually rub your hand over it. It doesn't hurt. Now my garlic is ready to go. So there's a little bit extra left. Never throw away these extra little pieces of garlic. If you don't want to have any chunks in what you're making, which I don't in these because it's going to be for my children to take to school, I have a little bag that I label veggie scraps, and I have the dates from the beginning date that I've added it in. And then I just keep all those little things like my extra little pieces of herbs that maybe I didn't need, and my garlic, things like my kale, the middle piece of the kale that you don't want to use in the kale salad. Those make wonderful additions to your homemade chicken broth, or to your homemade vegetable stock, or chicken stock, or beef stock. In order to grate the Parmesan cheese, I like to use a microplane. This is my favorite microplane from Lee Valley Tools, which is my favorite kitchen store. They have the most amazing kitchen tools, and it does such a fabulous job of getting you that beautifully fine shredded Parmesan cheese. And it's incredibly easy too. When I'm finished, I can keep it all, don't lose any, and it just comes right out. If you're not gluten-free, you can use panko for this recipe, but I use these rice breadcrumbs, which are quite lovely. And if you can't eat rice, you can also use pea crumbs, which is just made from pea flour. So that's quite lovely in it as well, and gives it a lovely flavor. The next thing we're going to do is just to prepare our chicken. Now, I have all of my chicken at room temperature. All of my chicken came out of the refrigerator. And now these are boneless, skinless chicken thighs. And they basically come this way. When you open them up, you can see there's a really thin part. So what I do is just separate them. I use kitchen shears for this. So I just cut them into little strips. You can use chicken breast for this as well. And if there's extra little kind of pieces hanging around, I will cut those out. And I will use those for making kind of like a separate little popcorn chicken. So we'll cut off the fat pieces. So I just want these basically little strips. So once again, if there's any bones that you can see, just cut them out. Cut it in half. And then into strips. Usually cut it into 4 pieces, but on occasion there's 5. Now, these extra little pieces I also save and place in the freezer, even including any extra little bones that you may find on there, because you can add those again to make chicken stock. And we'll make that another Sunday. It can be our Sunday dinner together in another video, because my family loves homemade chicken soup. You want them all to be about the same thickness so that they cook in the same amount of time. And if you have chicken breast, this you won't be cutting off quite as much. It'll be a little easier. I find these little boneless, skinless thighs are quite delicious for this dish. They make the really most flavorful chicken tenders. Once your chicken has been prepared, you're just going to place it into a bowl. And you're going to add your melted butter, or olive oil for dairy-free. That's about a tablespoon or 15 mils of melted butter. Your garlic. And your olive oil. I like to use extra virgin olive oil. And it's about a tablespoon or 15 milliliters that I add. You don't need a lot of oil because we're going to be using our air fryer. And then we're just going to give them a good mix. Just coating your chicken, all of the little chicken tenders in the oil, butter, and garlic. One of the main reasons I make sure that my chicken has warmed and is not scraped directly from the fridge is that the butter will actually become solid and you won't be able to spread it. Mine has a tiny bit because it was still cool, and that's okay. So the next thing, we're going to set that aside and now measure out the rest of our ingredients. About half a cup of our rice breadcrumbs or pea crumbs, whatever works for your family's dietary needs. Our Parmesan cheese, finely shredded. Now, if you're dairy-free, I'm also going to have a dairy-free option that I'll share with you. In order to make this dairy-free, simply replace the Parmesan cheese with an equal amount of nutritional yeast. Here, I've also shown it mixed with pea crumbs, making it dairy and rice-free. So next, we're going to add our spices to the mix. I like to add chili powder. You can really add any spices that you love. So it's about 5 mils or 1 teaspoon. Not too particular. I love smoked paprika. Oh my goodness, it just smells so good. So I put about half a teaspoon of smoked paprika. I just love the flavor that it brings. A teaspoon of regular paprika. I like spice, as you can tell. A little bit of white pepper. I find white pepper just gives it a little bit more of a subtle flavor. And I do about 1/8 of a teaspoon to 1/4 of a teaspoon. My daughter doesn't love very spicy food, so I just give it a little. And then also just a little pinch, so about half, so maybe 1/16 of a teaspoon, just a little pinch of cayenne pepper, just to give it a little bit of a kick, but not too hot. And then I also give a little tiny bit, so just a little tiny pinch, less than 1/8 of a teaspoon of turmeric. And last but not least, some kosher salt, which I obviously need to refill. And then I add about 3/4 of a teaspoon of kosher salt. You can add more or less depending on your preference. I find because we have Parmesan cheese in here as well, it also has a saltiness. So then we're just going to give it a good whisk together. And we're ready to go. And lastly, we're just going to take our chicken and we're just going to coat it. After we completely coat the chicken, you can just place it onto a tray, ready to be cooked in the air fryer. And you can also cook this in the oven too. If you don't have an air fryer, just turn the oven to about 400 and cook for the same amount of time. 10 minutes or so, keeping an eye after 5 minutes. And because there's no egg in this recipe to help hold it together, it doesn't get as much of a batter on the outside. And these are nice small chicken tenders, so they're great for lunches. If you don't like using your fingers, you could also use some tongs. Anything that doesn't fit in the air fryer, I'll put directly into the freezer for 30 minutes, then take it out, put it in a freezer-proof bag, and freeze until I'm ready to use it. So let's go ahead and get these in the air fryer. So make sure to preheat your air fryer to 390 degrees Fahrenheit or about 200 degrees Celsius. And you're going to be baking after 5 minutes of preheating. You'll be baking for about 10 to 12 minutes. Once the air fryer oven is preheated, then make sure to give a little space between each of the chicken tenders. You don't want to overcrowd them. It's okay if they're touching as long as they're not overlapping one another and there's room for air to move around in your air fryer. Here I have placed on one side my regular chicken fingers, on the other side my dairy-free, rice-free ones. So after they've been cooking for about 5 minutes or so, you can take them out and give them a little flip. Then just keep an eye, especially if they're in the oven, and look at that. They look just perfectly crispy, and so they are ready to come out. You want to make sure that they're nice and crispy before you remove them from the air fryer. Now, there is a little bit of a visual difference between the dairy-free and rice-free chicken fingers. However, I promise you'll barely be able to tell the difference in the taste. And they make the best lunches. Just add in a few fresh fruit and veggies and your lunch is done in 10 minutes. I sure hope you've enjoyed making these amazing chicken tenders with me today. And if you have any questions, please feel free to ask them in the comments below. And you can also find the full recipe on my website at turmericmecrazy.com. So I'll see you next Sunday when we're going to make another delicious meal. Oh my goodness, it's so good. It almost tastes like Kentucky Fried Chicken I remember as a child. Or shake and bake. Yes, that's what it reminds me of.